Most people spend their lives believing that attention is something they must earn from others. They measure their worth by the speed of a reply, the warmth of a greeting, the number of invitations they receive, or the approval reflected in another person's eyes. This is the first psychological trap. The moment your sense of value depends on another person's recognition, you have surrendered the most important possession you own, your attention. Attention is not merely the act of looking at something. It is your time, your emotional energy, your focus, and ultimately your life. Every minute spent obsessing over someone who ignores you is a minute invested in strengthening their influence over your mind. Whether they intended it or not, they begin to occupy your thoughts while contributing nothing to your growth. This silent exchange creates an imbalance of power, and power always flows toward the person who is least emotionally dependent. Observe the people who command genuine respect. They are rarely the loudest individuals in the room. They do not constantly seek reassurance or chase after every opportunity to be noticed. Instead, they possess an inner certainty that allows them to remain composed whether others recognize them immediately or not. Their confidence is rooted in something deeper than public approval. They understand that true value is not created by applause but by substance. A diamond remains valuable even when hidden beneath the earth. Its worth does not fluctuate according to who discovers it. Human beings operate in much the same way, although many forget this truth. They assume that if someone overlooks them, they have somehow become less important. In reality, another person's inability to recognize your value changes nothing about your potential. There is another force at work that most people never question. The human mind is naturally drawn toward what appears difficult to obtain. This principle governs relationships, business, politics, and social influence. The more desperately you pursue someone's attention, the less valuable your attention appears. Desperation signals abundance. It communicates that your time is available in unlimited quantities, that your emotional investment carries little cost, and that your presence requires no effort to secure. People instinctively assign greater value to what is limited. This is why individuals who constantly seek validation often receive the least respect, while those who remain focused on their own path frequently attract curiosity without trying. They are not playing games. They simply understand the psychology of self-possession. Consider how much energy is wasted replaying unanswered conversations, checking messages repeatedly, inventing explanations for another person's silence, or imagining what could have been said differently. These habits feel harmless, but they quietly reshape your identity. Every repetition trains your brain to believe that your peace depends on external circumstances. Eventually, your emotions become controlled by someone who may not even be thinking about you. This is the hidden cost of chasing attention. It steals not only your confidence, but also your ability to direct your own life. Your greatest ambitions are postponed while your mind remains occupied by people who contribute nothing to your future. The wiser approach is surprisingly simple, but emotionally demanding. Redirect your attention toward becoming a person whose life is too meaningful to be consumed by unnecessary pursuit. Develop your knowledge until your conversations carry depth. Strengthen your discipline until your habits produce undeniable results. Build your character until your integrity becomes your reputation. Invest in your physical and mental health until your confidence arises naturally rather than depending on compliments. Each improvement increases your independence because it shifts your focus from seeking recognition to creating genuine value. Ironically, this transformation often attracts the very attention you once chased, but by then it no longer determines your self-worth. Understand that attention follows excellence far more reliably than desperation. The world consistently notices individuals who dedicate themselves to mastery instead of approval. Their influence grows because they contribute something meaningful rather than demanding constant acknowledgement. They recognize a timeless principle. The person who protects their attention protects their future. Every decision about where you place your focus becomes an investment that shapes who you will become. Spend that investment wisely. Refuse to donate your emotional energy to those who repeatedly ignore it. Give it instead to your purpose, your growth, your discipline, and the people who genuinely value your presence. In doing so, you reclaim the one resource that no one can restore once it is wasted, your life itself. One of the most misunderstood truths about human nature is that people rarely appreciate what they believe they can never lose. Familiarity creates comfort, but unchecked availability often creates indifference. This is not because people are inherently cruel, it is because the human mind instinctively assigns greater value to what carries the possibility of absence. When someone knows you will always call first, always apologize, always wait, and always return regardless of how they behave, they stop seeing your presence as a privilege. It slowly becomes an expectation. Expectations replace gratitude, and gratitude is the foundation of respect. The moment gratitude disappears, respect begins to fade without either person fully realizing what has happened. Many people respond to emotional distance by trying harder. They send longer messages, make greater sacrifices, become more accommodating, and convince themselves that if they simply prove their loyalty one more time, everything will change. This strategy feels logical because effort is rewarded in many areas of life. Hard work improves your skills, persistence builds successful businesses, and discipline strengthens your body. But relationships operate according to a different psychological law. Respect cannot be forced through excessive effort. In fact, relentless pursuit often communicates insecurity rather than strength. Every additional attempt to convince someone of your value unintentionally suggests that you are uncertain of it yourself. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to this emotional signal. Even when they cannot consciously explain why, power in relationships does not belong to the loudest voice or the most persistent person. It belongs to the individual who is emotionally centered enough to walk away from situations that repeatedly diminish their dignity. Walking away is often misunderstood as anger or revenge, but genuine distance has nothing to do with punishment. It is an act of self-preservation. It is the decision to protect your peace instead of sacrificing it for temporary approval. This distinction is important because people who leave merely to manipulate others remain emotionally attached. They are still hoping for a reaction. The truly confident person leaves because they recognize that their future deserves more attention than another person's indifference. History repeatedly demonstrates this principle. The leaders, artists, thinkers, and innovators who shaped the world were often ignored, criticized, or misunderstood during different stages of their lives. Had they devoted themselves entirely to winning over those who rejected them, they would never have accomplished anything meaningful. Instead, they redirected their energy toward creating value. They understood that convincing every critic or every indifferent observer was a waste of precious time. Their work eventually became impossible to ignore, not because they chased recognition, but because they developed substance that demanded attention. There is another psychological effect that occurs when you stop chasing people. You begin to observe their behavior with greater clarity. While you are pursuing someone, your emotions distort reality. You interpret small gestures as signs of hope, excuse repeated disrespect, and invent explanations that protect your attachment. Distance removes this emotional fog. You begin noticing patterns instead of isolated moments. You recognize whether someone genuinely values your presence or merely enjoys the convenience of your availability. This clarity is one of the greatest rewards of stepping back because it allows you to make decisions based on reality rather than wishful thinking. Walking away also transforms the relationship you have with yourself. Every time you choose dignity over desperation, you strengthen your self-respect. Confidence is not built through positive affirmations alone. It is built through repeated actions that demonstrate to yourself that your standards matter. Each decision to refuse disrespect becomes evidence that you believe your time, emotions, and energy have value. This internal evidence is far more powerful than compliments from others because it cannot be taken away by changing opinions. Ironically, people often begin to notice your absence only after you stop demanding their attention. This is not a guarantee, nor should it become your objective. Sometimes they return because they finally recognize your worth. Other times they simply miss the comfort your constant presence provided. These are not the same thing. Wisdom lies in recognizing the difference. Never mistake temporary curiosity for genuine respect. If someone values you only after losing access to you, their reaction reveals less about your transformation and more about human nature. Your responsibility is not to celebrate their renewed interest, but to protect the dignity you gain by choosing yourself. The greatest victory is not making someone chase you. It is reaching the point where your self-worth no longer depends on whether they do. Rejection is one of the few experiences that almost every human being fears, yet it is also one of the greatest teachers you will ever encounter. Most people interpret rejection as a judgment of their worth. They assume that if someone ignores them, excludes them, or walks away, it must mean they are not intelligent enough, attractive enough, successful enough, or interesting enough. This interpretation is emotionally understandable, but psychologically inaccurate. Rejection often reveals far more about compatibility, priorities, timing, and the other person's perspective than it does about your value. The mistake is allowing another person's decision to become the foundation of your identity. The stronger individual views rejection not as a verdict, but as information. Information is neither personal nor emotional. It simply reveals reality, and reality is always more valuable than comforting illusions. Human beings have a remarkable ability to deceive themselves when they desperately want a particular outcome. We ignore obvious signs because accepting the truth would force us to let go of our expectations. We explain away delayed responses, repeated excuses, broken promises, and emotional distance. We convince ourselves that the other person is simply busy, confused, or afraid of commitment. Sometimes these explanations are true, but far more often they become stories designed to protect us from disappointment. The longer we cling to these stories, the more energy we invest in a future that may never exist. This is why rejection is ultimately an act of revelation. It exposes the difference between what we imagine and what actually is. Although painful, this clarity is infinitely more valuable than living inside comforting fantasies. Consider how much of life is determined by where you choose to direct your energy. Every hour spent trying to win over someone who has already decided not to value your presence is an hour stolen from opportunities that could transform your future. While your attention remains trapped by one closed door, countless open doors remain unnoticed. This is one of the greatest psychological costs of rejection when it is misunderstood. Instead of functioning as a signal to change direction, it becomes an anchor that keeps you standing in the same place. You wait for validation that may never come while life quietly continues without you. Time does not pause because you are disappointed. Opportunities do not wait until you recover from emotional attachment. The world continues moving, rewarding those who adapt rather than those who remain emotionally imprisoned by the past. History offers countless examples of individuals whose greatest successes emerged only after repeated rejection. Inventors were dismissed before changing industries. Writers accumulated rejection letters before publishing works that shaped generations. Entrepreneurs were told their ideas would never succeed before building companies that transformed entire economies. What separated these individuals from everyone else was not the absence of rejection, it was their interpretation of it. They understood that every rejection eliminated a path that was not meant for them and redirected their effort toward one that was. They treated failure as feedback rather than identity. This subtle shift in thinking allowed them to continue growing while others surrendered. There is another lesson hidden inside rejection that few people appreciate. It reveals where your emotional dependence exists. If one person's silence completely destroys your confidence, the problem extends beyond that individual. It suggests that too much of your self-worth has been invested in external approval. This realization is uncomfortable because it forces you to confront your own habits instead of blaming circumstances, yet it is also liberating. Once you recognize that your confidence has become dependent on another person's acceptance, you regain the ability to change the source of that confidence. Instead of seeking validation through attention, you begin building it through discipline, competence, integrity, and meaningful achievement. These qualities remain with you regardless of who chooses to stay or leave. Perhaps the greatest gift rejection offers is freedom. Every person who ignores your efforts removes uncertainty from your life. They answer a question that many people continue asking for years. Do they truly value your presence? Their actions speak more honestly than their words ever could. Accepting this answer allows you to stop negotiating with reality. You no longer waste emotional energy attempting to persuade someone to appreciate what they have already chosen to overlook. Instead, you redirect that energy toward people who recognize your value without constant persuasion and toward goals that reward consistent effort. Life becomes lighter because you stop carrying relationships that exist only through your persistence. The mature response to rejection is neither bitterness nor revenge. It is gratitude for clarity. Every closed door narrows your path toward places where your abilities, character, and presence are genuinely welcomed. Every person who walks away creates space for someone whose respect does not require endless proof. Most importantly, every rejection reminds you that your worth cannot be determined by another person's inability to recognize it. When you embrace this truth, rejection loses its power to define you and becomes nothing more than a signpost pointing you toward a future where your energy is invested wisely rather than wasted chasing those who have already chosen another direction. The greatest mistake people make after being ignored is believing the solution lies in becoming more appealing to others. They change their personality, suppress their opinions, overextend their generosity, constantly seek ways to earn approval. This creates a dangerous cycle because every improvement is motivated by external validation rather than genuine growth. True transformation begins only when you stop asking, how can I make them value me? And start asking, how can I become a stronger version of myself? These two questions appear similar, but they lead to entirely different lives. One places your future in another person's hands, while the other places it firmly under your own control. The individuals who command lasting respect rarely build their lives around the opinions of others. Instead, they dedicate themselves to mastering valuable skills, strengthening their character, and developing a sense of purpose that exists independently of public recognition. Every hour spent reading, learning, exercising, creating, or refining your craft becomes an investment in yourself. Unlike chasing approval, these investments continue paying dividends long after the moment has passed. Knowledge cannot be taken away because someone ignores you. Discipline does not disappear because a relationship ends. Confidence built through consistent effort remains stable because it is supported by evidence rather than compliments. There is a psychological shift that occurs when you begin focusing on self-development instead of external validation. Your conversations become more thoughtful, because you have expanded your understanding of the world. Your decisions become more confident because they are guided by principles rather than emotions. You stop reacting impulsively to every delayed message or distant behavior because your mind is occupied with goals that genuinely matter. This change is subtle at first, but over time it transforms the way others perceive you. People are naturally drawn toward individuals who possess direction and purpose because Purpose creates an unmistakable sense of stability. Another benefit of investing in yourself is that it changes the standards you accept from others. As your confidence grows, you become less willing to tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or emotional inconsistency. You no longer confuse attention with affection or convenience with commitment. Instead, you evaluate relationships according to mutual respect, honesty, and shared effort. This protects your emotional well-being because you stop settling for connections that require constant chasing. You understand that meaningful relationships are built through reciprocity, not relentless pursuit. Ironically, the more fulfilled you become through your own growth, the less desperate you feel for anyone else's approval. You begin to enjoy your own company, trust your own judgment, and appreciate your own progress. This quiet confidence cannot be manufactured through appearances or empty words. It emerges from repeated acts of discipline and self-respect. In the end, the most powerful response to being ignored is not proving your worth to those who overlooked you. It is becoming so committed to your own growth that their opinion no longer determines your happiness, your direction, or the value you place on yourself. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. Most people associate strength with speaking louder, explaining themselves endlessly, defending every accusation, or demanding to be heard. Yet those who truly understand human nature recognize that silence often communicates more than words ever can. When someone ignores you, disrespects you, or attempts to provoke an emotional reaction, your first instinct may be to respond immediately. You want to explain your intentions, prove your innocence, or convince them to see your perspective. This reaction is natural, but it often places you in a weaker position. Every unnecessary response reveals emotional dependence, while measured silence demonstrates self-control. In the language of power, self-control is always more persuasive than emotional urgency. Many people fear silence because they mistake it for weakness. They believe that remaining quiet means surrendering or admitting defeat. In reality, strategic silence is an act of discipline. It is the ability to resist the temptation to react impulsively. Human beings are emotional creatures, and emotions demand immediate expression. Anger wants retaliation. Disappointment wants reassurance. Rejection wants explanation. But wisdom understands that not every emotion deserves a response. The strongest individuals pause before acting, because they know that words spoken in emotional moments often create consequences that last far longer than the feelings that produce them. Silence also has a remarkable psychological effect on other people. When someone expects you to chase, argue, or beg for attention and you calmly refuse to participate, you interrupt their expectations. Suddenly, they are left alone with their own thoughts instead of controlling yours. This shift changes the dynamic. Instead of constantly reacting to another person's behavior, you become the one directing your own emotions. Whether they notice your silence or not becomes irrelevant because your primary goal is no longer to influence them. Your goal is to protect your peace and preserve your dignity. Another reason silence is powerful is that it creates space for observation. When you stop filling every moment with explanations, you begin noticing patterns that were previously hidden by your emotions. You observe who reaches out without being reminded. You notice who values your presence only when it benefits them. You recognize who respects your boundaries and who becomes uncomfortable when they can no longer control your reactions. These observations provide valuable information that endless conversation often conceals. Silence allows people to reveal themselves through their actions, and actions are always more reliable than promises. Perhaps the greatest strength of silence is that it redirects your energy inward. Instead of spending hours preparing responses, replaying conversations, or seeking validation, you invest that time in improving yourself. Your attention returns to your ambitions, your discipline, your relationships with those who genuinely appreciate you, and your long-term goals. In this way, silence becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes the presence of focus. It reminds you that your energy is limited and should never be wasted trying to convince someone of your worth. The person who masters silence does not become distant or cold. They simply understand that peace is too valuable to sacrifice for arguments that change nothing and for people who have already chosen not to listen. The greatest mistake people make after being ignored is believing that the ultimate victory is making the other person regret losing them. They imagine a future where those who overlook them suddenly return with admiration and apology. While this fantasy is understandable, it still keeps your life centered on someone else's opinion. True power begins when your success is no longer designed to impress those who ignored you, but to fulfill your own potential. The objective is not to become someone who chases attention or someone who manipulates others into chasing you. The objective is to become a person whose character, discipline, and purpose naturally command respect without demanding it. People are instinctively drawn to individuals who possess direction. A person with meaningful goals does not spend every day wondering who replied to a message or who failed to notice them. Their attention is invested in building something larger than temporary approval. Whether it is mastering a profession, creating a business, improving their health, developing wisdom, or pursuing a meaningful mission, their life has momentum. Momentum is attractive because it reflects confidence. It tells the world that this person is moving forward regardless of who chooses to accompany them. This quiet determination creates influence far more effectively than constant efforts to gain recognition. There is an important distinction between appearing valuable and becoming valuable. Many people focus on appearances. They attempt to project confidence through expensive possessions, carefully crafted images, or calculated displays of success. These things may attract attention for a moment, but they rarely earn lasting respect. Genuine value comes from qualities that cannot be purchased or imitated. Integrity, emotional discipline, reliability, competence, and resilience are developed through years of consistent action. They become part of your identity rather than something you perform for an audience. People may initially notice appearances, but over time they trust substance. As you continue developing yourself, another transformation occurs. Your standards begin to rise. You stop accepting relationships based on convenience, inconsistency, or one-sided effort. Instead of asking whether someone likes you, you begin asking whether they contribute positively to your life. This shift changes everything because it places your attention on quality rather than quantity. You no longer seek acceptance from everyone you meet. You understand that respect is mutual and that healthy relationships require effort from both sides. Anyone unwilling to offer that effort simply creates more space for people who will. Ironically, when you stop pursuing validation, you often become more noticeable. Confidence expressed through actions rather than words has a magnetic quality. Others recognize that you are not driven by desperation, but by purpose. They see someone who values time, protects boundaries, and refuses to compromise dignity for temporary attention. Some people who once ignored you may eventually become curious about your transformation. Others may attempt to reconnect because they realize your absence has changed the dynamic. Whether they return or not is no longer the central question. By this stage, your happiness no longer depends on their response. The most meaningful victory is not hearing someone admit they were wrong about you. It is reaching a point where their opinion no longer controls your decisions or your confidence. You wake each day with a clear purpose, invest your energy in meaningful work, and surround yourself with people who recognize your worth without requiring endless proof. Your growth becomes your identity, your discipline becomes your reputation, and your peace becomes your greatest achievement. At that moment, you have accomplished something far greater than making people chase you. You have built a life so rich in purpose and self-respect that chasing anyone no longer feels necessary.